Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're navigating some really complex waters, global geopolitical flashpoints, and we're zeroing in on one of the most delicate, maybe most explosive, Taiwan. But look, this isn't just about the dynamic between Beijing and Taipei, not really.
No, it goes much wider.
Exactly. Our deep dive today is, well, it's really about the broader implications, what this whole situation means for the entire Indo-Pacific region, freedom of navigation, which is critical, and honestly, the future shape of global influence.
Right.
So our mission, our goal here, is to unpack these intricate layers surrounding Taiwan, its huge global significance, and maybe most importantly, the pivotal role India could play, a role that's, often overlooked if conflict actually erupts.
It's quite something when you consider how much is truly at stake here. We're talking about potentially foundational shifts in global power dynamics.
Yeah.
Maybe even reshaping the world order. And understanding these underlying currents, it's not just academic, is it? It's about seeing these critical turning points that are happening right now in real time.
That clarity is so important because when we talk about Taiwan, well, people often call it the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoint on Earth.
They do.
And at its core, you have this fundamental disagreement. It could hardly be more stark, really. China sees Taiwan as a, quote, breakaway province, something that must be reunified by force if they have to.
Right.
But Taiwan sees itself very differently as a, quote, sovereign democracy, its own elected government, its own distinct identity. It's like two completely different realities just clashing head on.
And caught right in the middle of this this deep ideological divide, you've got the Western powers, especially the U.S.
Yep.
And they navigate this policy that's often called strategic ambiguity.
Strategic ambiguity. Okay, what does that actually mean on the ground?
Well, it means they support Taiwan's ability to defend itself. They provide arms and support, but they stop short of formal diplomatic recognition. They don't officially say, yes, Taiwan, you're an independent country. And the sources we looked at make it really clear this isn't some accident or oversight. This ambiguity is quite deliberately by design.
Right, a balancing act.
Exactly. It's this delicate tightrope walk.
Yeah.
The idea is to deter both an invasion by China and an outright declaration of independence by Taiwan.
As I was reading through the materials, what really jumped out at me was the sheer economic scale of Taiwan's role. It's actually kind of mind-blowing.
It is.
Taiwan, this relatively small island, controls an astonishing 60% of global semiconductor production. Can you help us, help our listeners really grasp how massive that is? What happens if that supply chain gets hit?
It's almost hard to fathom that kind of concentration of such a critical resource. I mean, semiconductors, they're the brains in everything, right? Your phone, your car, advanced military gear.
Everything.
Everything. And yes, Taiwan is the undisputed global leader. So if China were to take Taiwan by force, the consequences would just echo globally, far, far beyond the immediate area.
So it's not just about military control.
Oh, no. It wouldn't just be about controlling the first island chain in the Pacific, that critical arc of islands, Japan down to the Philippines, crucial for maritime control. They'd potentially gain dominance over the entire global tech supply chain.
Wow.
Plus, critical military positioning across the Pacific and a significant psychological boost, a kind of supremacy throughout Asia.
Yeah.
It would fundamentally change the global power balance.
Okay, so we've got the economic stakes laid out. Huge. Let's shift gears a bit to the military side. What are we seeing from Beijing? What kinds of preparations are they making? And how clearly are they, signaling what they might do about Taiwan?
Well, Beijing's signals have been pretty clear. Almost overt, you could say. We've seen these massive military drills conducted around Taiwan.
The encirclement drills.
Exactly. Designed to surround, intimidate. Then there are the tests of advanced hypersonic missiles, the launch of new aircraft carriers like the Fujian, expanded deep-sea submarine patrols. It's all part of what looks like a detailed plan from Beijing to project overwhelming force and potentially conquer Taiwan.
But it's important, I think, to add some context to China's military strength here.
Absolutely.
It's impressive, no doubt. But there's a key counterbalance, right? The sources mention the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is, quote, untested in modern war.
That's a huge factor. Unlike, say, the U.S. military, they haven't been in a major conflict recently. That's a significant unknown.
Right. And Taiwan itself, it hasn't been passive. They've invested heavily in their own defenses, advanced systems. Plus, the island itself, that mountainous terrain, any large-scale amphibious landing would be just a monumental challenge.
Extremely difficult. Very risky.
And this really brings us to the absolute crunch question hanging over everything.
The big one.
Will the U.S. intervene directly? I mean, President Biden has said multiple times, quite explicitly, the U.S. will defend Taiwan.
Yes.
Yet, as you said, the official policy remains strategically ambiguous.
It does. That's the tightrope.
And it feels like it's precisely in that ambiguity that the greatest danger really lies, that risk of miscalculation.
Exactly. That's what the sources really hammer home. In such a tense, highly charged environment, it could just take one wrong move. One trigger-happy pilot, maybe a false flag incident.
And suddenly
we're potentially in a multi-nation war. The stakes for everyone involved, they just couldn't be higher.
Okay, so this is where India starts to come into the picture in a really interesting way.
Yes, India's unique position.
For years, India really maintained a stance of strategic neutrality, right? Especially on issues across the Taiwan Strait. That geopolitical landscape has definitely shifted.
Undeniably. The Indo-Pacific isn't some distant theater for India anymore. It's now quite clearly India's strategic backyard.
That's a big shift in thinking. So how exactly is India stepping up its presence then, its influence in the region? What are the concrete things we're seeing?
Well, India is, as one source put it, silently increasing its presence and its influence. You see it through partnership.
Like the QUAD.
Yeah. Exactly. The QUAD with the US, Japan, Australia. Also things like the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative and joint naval exercises, big ones like Malabar.
Okay.
These collaborations are basically building a stronger network. Democracies with shared interests working together more closely in the region.
And there's one geographic asset that really seems to highlight India's strategic leverage here. The Andaman and Nicobar Command.
Ah, yes. Crucial.
This forward base, it's strategically located incredibly close to the Malacca Strait, which is, as the sources say, a critical choke point for Chinese trade and naval access.
That feels like a very powerful card for India to potentially play.
It absolutely is. A huge strategic advantage. So in the event of a conflict over Taiwan, while India might not, directly engage right there in the Taiwan Strait,
right,
its position and its capabilities mean it could potentially enforce strategic denial, maybe blockade logistics or pressure China diplomatically and militarily, but from a completely different direction.
So it gives them options, significant strategic options.
Definitely. Okay, let's game this out a bit based on the sources. They outlined 3 distinct war scenarios. First, a blockade. China tries to cut Taiwan off, force surrender.
Starve them out, essentially.
Second, a limited strike. Maybe a decapitation strike on specific political or military targets. Quick, surgical, supposedly.
Right, targeted attacks.
And third, the big one, a full-scale invasion. We're talking a massive amphibious assault, a whole air-land-sea campaign.
The maximum scenario.
Okay, for each of those, how might India respond? What are the potential actions?
Well, India's actions would likely vary depending on the scenario, but the overall goal would probably be aiming for regional strategic stability.
Okay.
So in a blockade, India could significantly increase its naval presence, probably coordinating with QUAD partners, maybe even help supply humanitarian aid to Taiwan.
Makes sense. What about a limited strike?
If it's a limited strike, India might stay more on the diplomatic track, condemning the aggression, calling for restraint, but perhaps stopping short of a direct military response itself.
Okay. Still active, but maybe less directly involved militarily.
Possibly. But now, if it escalates to a full invasion, that changes things. India could activate really robust defense diplomacy, actively support its allies, and crucially,
the LAC.
Yes, significantly increase its readiness along the line of actual control the disputed border with China in the Himalayas. That would effectively be pressuring China on 2 fronts.
Right, forcing China to divide its attention and resources.
Exactly, a major strategic complication for Beijing.
So the key takeaway here, for you listening, is that India's role probably wouldn't be on the absolute front line in a Taiwan fight, but it could be utterly pivotal in shaping the wider strategic landscape and ultimately the outcome.
Pivotal is the right word. And if we zoom out again, connect this to the broader context, it's worth thinking about China's internal calculations here.
Right. It's not just about capabilities, it's about willingness and risk.
Precisely. While Xi Jinping has clearly expressed this strong desire for, quote, reunification, starting a war carries massive risks for Beijing, potentially prohibitive risks.
Especially now.
Especially now. China's dealing with an economic slowdown, a serious demographic crisis looming, and a growing pushback from parts of the global south, a failed invasion of Taiwan. That could very well be the end of Xi Jinping's political legacy.
Which brings us right back to India's central challenge here, that strategic balance.
The tightrope again.
Yeah. It cannot appear too aligned with the West, given its history of non-alignment and strategic autonomy.
But it also cannot ignore Chinese aggression, particularly when it's happening in what it considers its own strategic backyard.
So what does this all mean for India's path forward? How do they actually navigate this?
Well, the solution proposed in the materials we reviewed is pretty clear. A multi-aligned, assertive India.
Multi-aligned, not non-aligned.
Multi-aligned, meaning partnering with democracies where interests align, like the QUAD, but always prioritizing its own national interest and fundamentally preparing for all possible contingencies. It's about flexibility and strength in a really complex world.
Okay. And what's really helpful, I found, is that the sources provide a very specific sort of checklist for Indian policymakers, concrete actions they could take.
Yes, quite practical.
Things like upgrading their naval strike groups, especially in the Bay of Bengal, strengthening cyber and space deterrence, key areas now.
Crucial domains.
Securing those vital trade routes, mentioning Seychelles, Mauritius, Chabahar port in Iran, hardening defenses on its eastern seaboard, and those key islands like Andaman and Nicobar.
Bolstering the defenses there, yes.
And interestingly, boosting semiconductor production right there at home, reducing dependency.
Building resilience. It all fits together.
It does.
So if you summarize this whole section, the message coming through for New Delhi seems pretty direct. If Taiwan burns, India must secure its own waters, guard its skies, and essentially anchor the Indo-Pacific with calm strength. That's the strategic imperative.
A powerful summary. Taiwan might be the spark.
But the Indo-Pacific is the fuel.
And make no mistake, the shape of the next global order, it's being shaped right now in real time.
Yeah.
As we speak.
Absolutely. History in motion.
And India, it really feels like it stands at the edge of history here. The choices its leaders, its people make today will define its security, its economy, and its destiny for decades to come.
A pivotal moment for India indeed.
So maybe something for you to think about as you go about your day. How might events in what seems like one distant flashpoint Taiwan actually ripple through global supply chains, shift geopolitical alignments, and yes, even impact aspects of your own daily life? Just reflect on that profound interconnectedness of world events after this deep dive.